All right, so I'm a fan of manga, and then I'm like, oh, I'll just make a comic, right? You know, I do arts, but obviously I have a lot to learn if I want to make an actual product that is worth selling or just reading. And I need to study a lot, and not just from manga, but from all forms of media. And that includes, or that should include, American comics, right? Or just other comics aside from Japanese comics. And I didn't know where to start. I had no clue. Obviously, I've been hearing horror stories of how all superhero stuff is interconnected, and so it's really hard to get into because it's all just, you can't just read one series. It's all Spider-Man crosses over with the Hulk all the time. And at this point, I realize I should have just gone to my friends for recommendations, since some of them are into American comics. Yeah, I should have done that. They did find me very good recommendations, or at least I assume they're good. I haven't actually picked them up yet. But before this, I went to a comic book store, as I assume anyone who wants to initially get into comics would probably try to do. And so this is my story. And just as a preface, I'm going to be talking about things like the entire comic book industry, but this is a kind of story from my perspective of it. It's not me as an expert talking about how comics should be published and distributed. It is my experience as someone who doesn't know about comics, and therefore anyone who's a fan of comics, this is what we, or at least I, experience as an outsider. And while I'm prefacing, I hear a lot of good points being shot down just through semantics. So I'm not going to waste any time on the video on this. I'm just going to put it up on screen. Manga versus American comics. This is what I mean when I talk about these topics. All right, so the story begins, and so I look up a local comic book store near my area, about 20-minute drive away. My thought process is, okay, well, I could probably just like go to the owner and probably say just like, hey, I'm a manga head, I got no idea what I'm looking for, and he'd probably have recommendations, right? There's got to be types like me that pop up in the store occasionally. So I get there and I start looking around, and I see probably just like a couple hundred boxes, each containing like 100 superhero comics. Like it feels like there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands in the store, but it seems like most of it is superhero stuff. And honestly, that's the stuff I'm most intimidated by, especially because I'm just kind of tired of superhero stuff after all the Marvel movies. So even with all the crossover stuff, I'm just not feeling like reading any superhero stuff. And so after looking around for a little bit of my own, I talked to the owner and I explained my situation. He doesn't have any real recommendations off the top of his head, but that's no big deal, whatever. And he takes me to the indie section. So unlike the literal thousands upon thousands upon thousands of superhero things, there's maybe 80 comics on display here. Maybe there's more stuff in back, but this is the indie section, and there's just like 80. And honestly, like half of these are just indie superheroes, at least. And beyond that, half of those are IPs like Ninja Turtles, Transformers, or Power Rangers. So, not exactly what I was looking for as a manga head, as I called it previously. I kind of thought there'd be like a bunch of new stories that I could look at that aren't just tied to IPs that Power Rangers is the newest one and they're still like 30 years old now or something. But all these just super old IPs, it's like comics they just felt really stuck, I guess, in the past. Like there's only these really. And so it might have been asking for a bit much, but I was kind of hoping for more than 20 comics that presented a brand new series. And maybe I shot myself in the foot for wanting even more, because I really wasn't looking for something like that was grim and dark and gritty. And that's what a lot of comics seem to be to me. My perception was that non-superhero comics always tended to be something like a badass bounty hunter, or a miserable noir detective, or a dark underground cult, or something like that, you know? And so I start off by saying I want something light, like maybe an adventure. You know, I'm a huge fan of One Piece, so that's clearly where I want to go. But I'm also like, maybe like a thriller too, something that gets me to use my brain a bit. Maybe like a lighter kind of mystery, not something that's noir, but just something that, you know, I felt like these were very, very wide genres to pick from. Like, the adventure, what does that mean? That could mean anything. And as long as it's not too dark or sad or gritty or bloody and all that stuff. It's like, okay, I'll try it. So the guy pauses, and then he points and he says, we got Conan. That's pretty adventure-y, and it's got lots of blood and gore and stuff. And yeah, that didn't seem too light to me. I don't know, like my comics friend later, after I told him this whole situation, said, oh man, I can't believe you didn't go for Conan. And I said, do you really think that I enjoy Conan knowing what I like? And he's like, yeah, no, I guess you wouldn't. So I guess, I assume I was in the right to say I'm not feeling Conan. And so at that point, the clerk or owner started with his main selling tactic from that point on, which is, you just gotta look around and see if any covers stand out to you. I'm not a fan of that. I think judging books by their covers isn't the worst thing in the world before buying. Like, covers are made for a reason, but books tend to give you a brief synopsis of what's going on like the back cover. For comics in the store though, and I assume most comics, they don't have a visible synopsis. The back covers are entirely blocked by like a cardboard slab used to prop up the floppy issues for the stands. And even when I got home with some comics, I noticed that the back covers didn't have anything on them. There's no expectation of a synopsis to be on the back cover for comics, it seems. So legitimately, I just need to buy a comic based on the vibes of some dude on the front cover. And I also know enough about how comics work to know that they have things like variant covers. So I know these covers aren't something that's tailor-made to give you the perfect impression of what the book's about. It's just a cover, it's just a piece of art that's related to the story inside, but isn't necessarily indicative of the story inside. I mean, it seems like the expectation to me is that I just have to buy random stuff, which is kind of expensive. Like I got like a 20-page issue of an indie comic that's like an average manga chapter to me, so it's just like, it's a very short 10-minute kind of read, costs $5, and that feels like a lot to me. It's a lot to just invest in on absolutely nothing but a vibe from a front cover without knowing anything about the story inside. And apparently I'm expected to do this for just a lot of comics to find out which ones I actually like. But anyway, the clerk offers a few more comics that don't seem like a great match for what I'm looking for. The only thing he could seem to point out that was a light adventure was something about a mermaid, I guess, and it didn't quite appeal to me. But it's just so weird. That's like the one thing he could find that even vaguely could be considered light. I don't know. But I found two on my own that I thought might be interesting. There's a comic called The Magician's Rabbit. It looked like a very fun art style, very bright cover, unlike almost everything else in that section. And the Mandrake Project, because the cover was just vague enough that it might be like a Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter style fantasy or something. And I kind of saw a couple others that I might have been interested in, but they were on issue 2 or 3. And so the guy checked the back or whatever box that might have them to see if they had issue 1, and it turns out they didn't. Like, that's the only way you can get into new stuff, is by knowing, oh, this is new, and then just happening to pick it up from the very beginning and then continuing to read along with it. You just have to know your way around and be constantly buying issues of junk to even have access to any kind of complete narrative before you can even tell if they're any good. So after all that, I found a couple issues, like I mentioned. I was like, okay, that's enough of that. I found what I could. Where can I just find a Spider-Man run that I can easily get access to from start to finish? Let's just get a superhero thing out of the way. So he took me to the trade paperback section, which seemed to be the only solution for someone who wanted to actually have a complete story. Like, is that... And it was just a little drawer, technically 2 drawers, underneath one of the hundreds and hundreds of boxes of issues. That is the little section of trade paperbacks, and that is apparently the only expectation for getting a complete story. And so he said there's bound to be something Spider-Man in there. There wasn't. So yeah, that made things a little bit more difficult for me to want to get anything even superhero related, because I just wanted a story I could read from start to finish, or at least to start on if it was a really long story, you know? But okay, I didn't find anything there. There was this last out of the way shelf with maybe like 15 books on it. Let's take a quick look at that. Again, there's no Spider-Man, but I finally get recommended something that sounds genuinely interesting to my own personal taste, and that shocked me. It's called 8 Billion Genies, and the premise is that every living human suddenly gets access to a genie with a single wish, and it explores the lives of 8 people deciding how to use their wish and dealing with the ramifications of wishes of others. And that was such a breath of fresh air. Like, not only did I get to know the premise, but it sounded genuinely interesting and innovative, and like it was like a very new premise that didn't have ties to an IP, wasn't superhero-y, and kind of just like made me think about how all the possibilities of all these cerebral interactions that people might have, or just very poignant character studies. And I was like, oh man, this has so much going for it. I actually really want to read this. And after spending 30 minutes in that store looking at nothing, that was amazing to me. And I was so excited to see that just like small glimmer of something interesting, that I made kind of a poor decision and I bought it without considering my budget. And it turned out the book was a whole $40 on its own. And that, combined with the other 2 issues I bought, got a lot more expensive than I intended it to be. But yeah, that was the end of my comic book store trip. I ended up buying those 3 comics. So I get home, I do start with The Magician's Rabbit. Very fun cover. I'm putting it up on screen here. Looked very cute. At worst, he'd be like a Rocket Raccoon type, that's kind of like, yeah, he shoots guns at people and stuff, but he's kind of funny, you know. Open it up. No, it's a badass gritty bounty hunter with noir vibes. Isn't that great? Oh, there's something so frustrating about seeing that. And the art style is still cute, but he is just a very noir type of thing. Like the rabbit goes into some kind of strip club or something and assassinates a robot man, and then gets approached by some hacker, and he's like, oh, this city. And it's only 20 pages. Like that's the entirety of the story that I got. But that is absolutely not what I was looking for, and not what I expected from a very fun, bright cover with a little rabbit on a motorcycle that shooting a gun that has a little bang flag coming out of it and has Wabbit on the license plate. It doesn't match at all. And so next I look at the Mandrake Project, and immediately I'm disappointed. It's got a very kind of like poetry almost kind of narration to it about a guy going through a graveyard and seems to be involved in some sort of like sex cult. Like I don't know, man. Like I couldn't even understand the story. I'm not good with the more abstract type of stories. So that was a bust too. So that was like $15 to $20 for both of those together. And I just had to test them, and it turns out they were absolutely not what I was looking for, and so it felt like a total waste. Great. But that's how the industry is designed, it seems. So just something to be expected. Waste $20 before you find something halfway decent. And so then I turned to 8 Billion Genies. I'm about to pull off the plastic cover for it, and then I stop, like literally a second before I rip off the plastic for it. And I'm like, this isn't worth it. I'm just gonna return this. I'm gonna get my $40 back, and I'm gonna spend it on something that I need. Because this whole situation has just broken me down. This situation happened like a week and a half ago, and I've been ready to record this video ever since. And I just got so tired of being upset by this. And that's just really unfortunate to me, that the comics industry as I have seen it just through this one comic store experience is so opaque and difficult, and seems designed to just rip me off just to sell extra issues because they won't tell me what's in the actual stories. It just broke me down. And I just think back to manga and how it's like, oh, if I'm interested in manga and if I want to just spend money on it and do things legit, I can just go to the Viz Shonen Jump website, pay $2.99 a month for a subscription, and read any manga I want for free. Or if I don't even want to do that, the first 3 chapters, I think, of every single story on that app/website is totally free, because they want you to get hooked into the stories before you buy them. And everything is its own self-contained story/IP, like aside from a few exceptions like Boruto, which are just like sequel spin-offs, everything is its own story. Everything is an individual artist/author. They're telling you a story from the start. Like, granted, it's gonna be a while before you get a complete story, because these these manga go on for a long time, and the arcs can sometimes last like 10 whole volumes, which is like 2,000 pages. But you can just start from the beginning and read and find out if this interests you. And every story feels, even if it's all a very similar genre like battle shonen, like they're trying to give you something new. And I just cannot seem to get that from American comics, no matter where I go, at least on my own. And so, yeah, I'm going to be reading my friends' recommendations, but I'm not going to be eager to buy anything. I'm going to try to find what I can read for free first, because I just got ripped off. It feels like I got ripped off, at least. And so I see a lot of discourse, people into American comics being asked, why do you think manga is doing better? And there's a lot of contention whenever that question gets brought up. And I just have to think, from my perspective, comics were made to be sold off as really episodic. Just pick up one issue and read it, and you got a little story there. It's just a little quick story. You don't need to read anything before or after it. But that kind of storytelling is kind of out of date to our modern reading audience, or viewing audience even, for like movies. And the industry just never evolved to match the longer storylines. They still printed as if you're just expecting to pick up a new issue out of nowhere and have that be your first issue, and then you just read it and be happy with it. You can't do that anymore. And my friend who's recommending me comics said, and by the way, I guess I should shout him out because he's making a comic too, and it's great. It's Caden Sketch, at Caden Sketch on Twitter. He's really, really good stuff. You might want to follow him. But he says he heard a quote from Stan Lee saying, remember, every comic is someone's first comic. And it feels like the entire industry has ignored that. And I was going to end it there, just a negative review about a bad day trip. And I wasn't even going to release this video because it felt like it was contributing nothing. But I want to end this on something more constructive. For example, I didn't even acknowledge the fact that you can just buy digital issues for cheap at greater convenience on comic book sites. I didn't mention that Webtoons and Tapas and other webcomic platforms provide dozens of great comic alternatives to Marvel and DC. Heck, I tweeted my complaints and I got this cool response saying stores can just put in a little bit of extra effort to bundle runs and label them for the convenience of new customers, and I thought that was really cool. And most importantly, I should have just gotten recommendations from my friends and people online, because that's how I find most of the manga I read anyway. So the real lesson is that the mainstream comic scene is inaccessible, but only on a surface brick and mortar kind of level. To that end, I want to make this video just a bit more positive by asking anyone who finds it, if you know a cool comic that a manga fan might like, please recommend it for me and any other manga fan in the comments. Bonus points if you point to an easy way to read it. We really would appreciate it to just find more cool things and feel a little bit more included in an industry that sometimes can push us away. And finally, as a final little twist, I did end up reading 8 Billion Genies. And it was very good. Everything I hoped it would be, actually. And to follow my own request, I'm recommending it. I'll leave a link to where you can buy the first issue for only a few bucks if the premise interests you. So that's the end of the video. I mentioned I'm making my own comic too. If what you saw of me drawing it was any interest at all, you can follow me on Twitter. I'll try to post updates when I can. And yeah, let's look forward to finding something cool to read.